and welcome to another episode of This Week in Cleantech, a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, December 6th, 2024. I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Ingle. Izzy Ross from Grist will be joining us shortly, but for now, I'm no place I'd rather be than with Cleantech commentator Mike Casey of TigerCom. Hello, Mike.
John Angle, do you know that you're a usurper in the waiting? Paul Gerke stopped by my Star trailer. We were kicking back with a couple of beers for the show.
You know,
I'm just telling you, we match notes. I got to just tell you, we think you have an anger management problem when it comes to small firms. And if you do, it's okay. If you do, we can get you help. But like this constant harshing on small startups, it leads us to think like when you were growing up, you're the kid who liked to squash bugs a little too much. Like it's just let's open door. Anytime you need help, you let us know.
Buddy, you're gonna get your wish here. a few more of these, and I'm just gonna be like, you can have him. Yeah, I'm not clutching onto this show. You want Paul? You go get Paul.
I don't want Paul.
Let me tell you this, Mike Casey. The grass isn't always greener. Okay, I'll always be your first co-host. Huh? And then it'll be Thanksgiving, and you'll be looking around the table, and you'll go, you know what? Maybe it was okay that he took a couple of cracks at me from time to time. I miss him. I do. And then you're going to think long and hard about how you've started these episodes. I'll leave it there. And I'll be somewhere else. I'll be somewhere else on a different show, Mike. Smiling, being complimentary, easygoing.
All right. Well, Andy Klump of Clean Energy Associates,
both of ours.
He praised the show. He wants us to know he's a regular listener, and he said on LinkedIn that he loves the show. Which I mean,
enjoy it while it lasts, Andy. Happy holidays. I'll see you at RE+. All right. We want to thank those listeners who, like Andy, have been sharing their feedback on the episodes. You can recommend stories for us to cover and also nominate Cleantechers of the Week at rew@clarionevents.com, and we'll have a link in the episode description as well. All right, Mike, you've got 10 minutes and counting
our first
with
story
me before your time expires.
Our first story. You know what our first story isn't? The one that a lot of listeners wanted, which was Elon Musk saying he's a 3,000-year-old vampire, but you shot it down. You're yet the latest media mogul who's like protecting these guys. I'm telling you. But anyway, our first story. Nicholas Rivero and Emily Wright from the Washington Post. Utilities build flow batteries big enough to oust coal gas power plants. John.
All right, so there's enough wind on a Japanese island to power itself and export clean energy to the rest of the country, but not without battery storage. So this island is looking to deploy a new generation of battery storage called flow batteries. Actually, not that new, which stores energy in large tanks of metallic liquid. Lithium batteries only last about 10 years, whereas the vanadium in these flow batteries can be used over and over again. And right now, the flow batteries can store energy for about 4 hours, approximately the same as lithium, but there are plans to double that duration. One major problem with these batteries is that they have double the upfront cost of lithium, skeptical financiers, and a market dominated by China and Russia, though we do have some domestic flow producers here in the U.S. Mike, your thoughts?
I'm glad you said vanadium first so I know how to say it.
Oh, that was a shot in the dark. I didn't even pronounce the Japanese island. You saw me skip right over that one.
I did. Oh, Hokkaido, if you were wondering. All right. Despite the disadvantages, flow battery farms have been built in Taiwan, Belgium, Australia, Morocco, and California with, surprise, China hosting the largest at 800 megawatts, the same amount of energy as the average U.S. natural gas plant. In 6 years, utilities are going to need to build 35 times as much battery capacity as there is today to manage all this extra renewable energy that's going to come online. Lithium, not the most efficient option because they're really good for small applications, but the critics say they don't last long enough to be for these utility scale storage applications. I know the lithium battery developers would say differently, just representing the arguments here. Story number 2, Mr. Engel.
Yeah, okay, this one is from the New York Times. Northvolt, Europe's hope for a battery champion, files for bankruptcy. Here we are, Mike.
Swedish battery maker Northvolt was viewed as Europe's strongest competitor to Chinese battery makers, but they just filed bankruptcy protection in the U.S. last Thursday. Northvolt, which makes lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, has been cutting jobs for months, and they faced several challenges this year when they lost a $2.15 billion contract with BMW. Ouch. The company plans to restructure its debt so it can continue operations in the future. Two planned factories in Germany and Canada were financed separately and will continue to operate, and the company's factories in Sweden will continue to make deliveries and pay vendors and employees. John, I know you have lots to
Okay,
say on Northvolt.
I guess so. So Northvolt said one of its customers promised to provide a $100 million loan, and it's also expecting $145 million in cash during this bankruptcy process. And despite losing over $1 billion last year, the company secured financing from the EU worth $5 billion in January. Even though some still have hope for Northvolt, others in the battery industry say it was a mistake to try and compete with Chinese manufacturers and that investors should have put their money toward new battery technologies. The slower Europe and North America transition to fully electric vehicles and more ground we lose to competitors from China. This story just reads of funny money when you read these sums. Mike, story number 3.
All right, third story, Will Wade, Bloomberg, U.S. solar installs facing flat growth, and that's before Trump. Mr. Engel.
Okay, so in 4 of the last 5 years, we've seen double-digit growth for solar installations, but according to a Sia Woodmack report released Wednesday, 2024 will see solar installations drop 1.8%. The pace of solar installations is expected to plateau through the end of the decade, and that's without considering the potential changes from President Trump, incoming President Trump. Over the next 5 years, average annual growth is expected to stay around 2%. Mike, your thoughts on the news?
I'm going to play analyst for 15 seconds and say that this plateau is largely due to labor gaps along with the interconnection queue. We want to build renewable energy in this country, especially after the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. At least most of us do, but these other barriers lie between us and massive growth. What's concerning about these projects is it does not take Trump's hostility toward clean energy into account. And right now, the impact of Trump's tariffs on the renewable energy sector is far from certain. We're going to see if massive demand from power from new data centers changes the dynamic here in the years to come. John, our fourth story.
Yeah, some familiar names from the Washington Post: Shannon Osaka, Maxine Joslow, and Sarah Kaplan, writing, "A strange new climate era is beginning to take hold." Mike.
You are not kidding, Mr. Engel. Climate scientists and environmental leaders have warned us to stay under the 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming since the Paris Agreement in 2015. In the years since, we've seen tremendous growth in clean energy, but not enough to stay under that threshold by a long shot. Carbon pollution could peak by as soon as next year, but the 1.5 degree goal seems way out of reach. John, what do you think?
Yeah. So we've made clean energy progress, including the EU's expansion of renewable energy generation from 37 to 50%, but electricity demand is rising, which means clean energy is connecting to the grid, but it's not causing fossil fuel to significantly decrease. Meanwhile, more than 40% of Africans don't have electricity access. So if the continent expands its power sector with oil, gas, and coal, our climate goals will be out of the window. The U.S. has an impact on our global climate goals as well. Experts say that harm done by the Trump administration, a second one, to American climate policy will come mostly from international trade policies. Trump's tariffs on imported goods from China, where the majority of clean energy technologies are produced, could significantly increase the cost of renewable energy deployment in the U.S. Mike, our fifth story and our guest this week.
Izzy Ross from Grist calling in from northern Michigan. She writes, Michigan wants to fast-track renewable development. Local townships are suing. Izzy Ross, welcome to the show. We want people to read your story, but in case they haven't yet, what's the big takeaway?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, about 80 local governments in Michigan are suing the state's plans to implement this new permitting reform law to fast track or streamline the process for big renewable energy projects like solar arrays and wind. I think the big takeaway is that governments saying they want more clean energy projects and even passing laws to do that and make that more possible and actually doing that are very different things. And this lawsuit and the legal action around this just goes to show that.
Izzy, it's my understanding that there have been previous legal challenges to Michigan's climate law. How is this different, and why might there be a different result this time around?
Yeah, earlier this year, a group tried to repeal this law entirely, but they didn't get enough signatures to put that repeal on the ballot, get it to a vote for voters to decide. There's a chance they could do that again, but for now, that's kind of dead. I talked to a researcher at the Sabin Center for Climate Law at Columbia Law School, and he said that it was easier or there were more options to target things like orders from the state rather than the law, the entire law itself. So this lawsuit is challenging the Michigan energy regulators, the Public Service Commission's plans to implement renewable siting, not the law itself. And as other states consider permitting reform and whether to keep big renewable projects under local or state control, these kinds of legal actions could be easier than, again, trying to, take on an entire law that's already been passed by state legislatures.
Izzy, in your reporting, did you see the hand of my old friend Kevin Martis? He's not really my friend, but just is he how I notice once his ballot initiative failed, he kind of fled the scene faster than you would drop plates at a restaurant. So he was nowhere around in the aftermath of his failed ballot initiative. Is he rearing his head in this effort?
Well, he is connected to various efforts, targeting laws like Michigan's permitting reform law. I haven't reported on that specifically, so I'm hesitant to weigh in on that. But I know that his name comes up a lot. He's been very involved in legal efforts on the local level and in talking to, local officials and folks who are paying attention to this issue in Michigan and across the state.
Mike, clearly Izzy's editorial standards are much stricter than ours here because Mike will just spout off about whatever comes to mind, which always makes me nervous. When you start a show, Mike, and you say, well, you said we couldn't talk about this, and then you go to proceed to talk about it, is just a wild turn of events for me as the host of this show. Izzy, to get back to clean energy and permitting reform, Izzy, what do you think this says about kind of the broader permitting squabble that we see taking place in states and really nationally? I know FERC recently issued a revision to their regional transmission plan to give states more control because the states saw kind of heavy-handed action by the feds. What should we make of all these movements, maybe in aggregate?
I think it shows that that a lot of people are paying attention to this issue. And again, it's just not going to be a straightforward process in a lot of cases. In discussions around this lawsuit, you see a huge array of opinions. There's folks like farmers who recently filed a brief in support of the state, in this lawsuit effort, saying, that the state's permitting reform law would help them to exercise their property rights and to, give them a path forward to maybe make some money on leasing land out to developers. But then on the other hand, you have folks in townships who are really worried about losing that control over how these big projects move forward around their communities. So there's just such a wide array of opinions, and I think there are efforts out there to kind of tackle this on the community level as well, so not just from a legal level, but also working in communities to try to work with township officials and county officials to see what the paths forward are there for everyone to find, room for compromise. But I just think that it's a complicated issue, and while this does provide, the law does provide developers with additional paths forward, they can always go to the state, no matter what the outcome of this appeal is right now. And anyways, I think it's just going to take some time for folks to really figure out what this looks like on the ground.
John, we're just about out of time. We need to go to our Cleantecher of the week.
Yeah, this week's Cleantechers of the week, the co-founders of Toast Brewing, Robert Wilson and Louisa Ziane, I believe is how you say her name, which brews beer with the surplus of fresh bread from bakeries, reducing agricultural demand for barley and food waste. Every second loaf of bread is wasted in the UK, but since 2016, Toast Brewing has saved enough bread to stack more than 4 times the height of Mount Everest. That's a lot of bread, Mike, and that's a lot of beer. Congratulations to Robert and Louisa.
We want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for gathering these stories.
Yeah, and thanks to Izzy Ross from Grist for joining us on this episode of This Week in Cleantech. Mike, Izzy, thank you, and we'll see you all next time.
See you, John Engel. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.